All right, today we're diving into something really interesting, a kind of paradox that's landed right in front of India's Supreme Court. The big question is this: what if a policy that's supposed to create equality actually ends up making things more unequal? It's a tricky one, right? It really makes you rethink what fairness even means. And it all kicks off with this massive reclassification debate.
So yeah, that's the million-dollar question. How does a policy, one that's designed to help the most marginalized people, get accused of leaving the very weakest behind? It sounds completely backwards. To get our heads around this, we first need to understand a key idea at the very center of this whole legal fight. And that big idea is called subclassification. Now, let's be clear. This isn't about adding or removing anyone from a reservation list. Instead, it's about looking at a big group, say the scheduled castes, and asking a really tough but important question. Is everyone in this group actually starting from the same point? Or are some people so far behind that they need a much more targeted push just to have a real shot at catching up?
So you might be asking, why is this such a huge deal right now? Well, the thing is, after decades, the benefits of reservation haven't really trickled down to everyone equally. You know that saying, a rising tide lifts all boats? It hasn't quite worked out that way. Some communities have done pretty well and moved forward, but others, the most marginalized ones, have kind of been left behind. And that growing gap is what pushed one state to try something, well, pretty controversial.
And here it is. This is the law that kicked this whole thing off. Back in 2006, the government in Punjab basically created a reservation within the reservation. They carved out 50% of the jobs for scheduled castes, specifically for the Valmiki and Mazhabi castes, calling them the weakest of the weak. The idea was simple: stop them from getting pushed out by the more advanced groups. But this pretty logical solution ran smack into a legal wall, all thanks to an older court ruling.
Yeah, that wall is what's known as the no tinkering rule. It comes from this major Supreme Court case that pretty much laid down the law for state governments, saying, hey, you cannot touch the official list of reserved groups. Once that list is made, it's set. You can't go in and create new little categories or rankings inside of it. So let's dig into the case that actually set this rule.
So this all goes back to a 2005 case, E.V. Chinaya. The court's thinking at the time was this: once the President of India officially publishes the list of scheduled castes, that list becomes one single solid, homogeneous group. You can't slice it and dice it. It's an all-or-nothing kind of deal.
And this is where things get really interesting. See, the court in that Chinaya case didn't just say don't add or subtract from the list. Justice Hedge used some really broad language. He said any action that interferes, disturbs, rearranges, regroups, or reclassifies the list is unconstitutional. That's a huge net. And that very broad ban on any kind of internal sorting is exactly what's being challenged today.
So how do you even begin to argue against something that sweeping? Well, the folks supporting the Punjab law have a really smart argument. They're basically saying the Chinaya court completely misunderstood what tinkering means. They're drawing a really clear line in the sand. Hey, giving priority to some people inside the list is not the same thing as changing the list itself. It really boils down to this. They're telling the court to just look at the actual words in the Constitution. Article 341 only gives Parliament two powers: to include a caste on the list or to exclude one. That's it. The argument is that the Chinaya court took those two simple words and just expanded them way out, inventing all these other rules against rearranging or regrouping that, just aren't there in the original text. I mean, think about it. The Punjab law didn't add any new castes to the list, and it didn't kick any out. The other SC communities could still compete for the other 50% of the jobs. So the argument is simple. This isn't tinkering with the list at all. It's just making sure the benefits actually get to the people who need them the most. It's about distribution, not definition.
But wait, there's more. The argument doesn't just stop at challenging the old ruling. The supporters of subclassification are saying, hey, if you actually look closely at the Constitution itself, it seems like it was designed for exactly this kind of flexible, nuanced approach. And I've got evidence right there in the text. Take Article 366. It actually defines scheduled castes as including parts of or groups within castes. That little phrase is huge. It suggests the people who wrote the Constitution never saw these communities as one single identical block. And you know what? There's already a precedent for treating people differently within a reserved group. It's called the creamy layer principle.
Okay, this is a seriously smart legal move. So the Supreme Court has already ruled that it's perfectly fine to exclude the most well-off members of a community, the creamy layer, from getting reservation benefits. And crucially, they said that this does not count as tinkering with the list. So now the petitioners are flipping that logic around. They're asking, look, if you can exclude the people at the top for the sake of fairness, then why on earth can't you prioritize the people at the very bottom for the exact same reason? It's the same core idea, just aimed in the other direction.
Now, this whole thing isn't just some abstract legal argument happening in a vacuum. Nope. The entire case for subclassification rests on cold, hard data. Data that shows some really shocking inequalities inside the scheduled caste communities in Punjab.
Just take a look at these numbers from the 2011 census. They paint a pretty stark picture. The literacy rate for the Ad-Dharmi community, over 81%. Pretty high. But for the Mazhabi community, it's just scraping by at 54.5%. That is a massive gap, almost 30 percentage points, between two groups that are supposedly on the same level. That's not a level playing field. It's more like a steep hill.
And of course, these differences in education have a direct impact on jobs. Look at this example. A recruitment drive for junior draftsmen. For the spots reserved for the Mazhabi and Balmiki communities, almost 2/3 of them, 49 positions, went completely unfilled. Why? There just weren't enough qualified candidates. But now look at the other scheduled caste groups. Not only were all their spots filled, they actually had more qualified people than jobs available. So you have one group with a massive opportunity gap and another with a surplus of candidates.
And if you need one number to really hammer this point home, here it is, 121. In a single recruitment drive for junior engineers back in 2021, 121 reserved posts for Mazhabis and Balmikis were left vacant. This is exactly what the petitioners are talking about when they call it the baneful effect, the damaging result of pretending that unequal groups are somehow equal.
So you see, all of this, the legal arguments, the constitutional deep dives, the hard data, it all comes back to one big fundamental question. A really philosophical question that the Supreme Court now has to face head-on. And honestly, the whole debate is summed up perfectly in this one powerful quote from the legal filings. It says that equality is secured not just when we treat equal people equally, but also when we treat unequal people unequally. This gets to the heart of what's called substantive equality, the idea that sometimes real fairness means giving different people different kinds of help so they can all get to the same finish line. So at the end of the day, the court has to pick a side between two totally different ways of looking at equality. Is it a one-size-fits-all approach that treats the entire scheduled caste list like it's one big, uniform group? Or is it a smarter, more targeted approach that actually acknowledges the huge inequalities within that group and tries to give a hand up to the most vulnerable people first?
Whatever the court decides, it's going to be a huge deal. It'll completely reshape affirmative action in India for years, maybe decades, and it leaves all of us with a really fundamental question to think about. What does true equality actually demand from us? Is it a uniform blanket approach that treats everyone the same, even when we know they're starting from wildly different places? Or is it a targeted approach, one that's designed to give the most help to the weakest of the weak? That, right there, is the heart of the debate.